just like glitter, shining bright, colors dance in the night. With colors so divine, mirror, mirror, show me now.
Things that we're seeking in these motions to compel are things that are outlined in the probable cause affidavit.
Hi, we're here at IGG 29 with Craig Klugman. Craig, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a bioethicist at DePaul University in Chicago, and I've been there for 5 years, and my background is in bioethics and health humanities.
How did you get into that? Very interesting.
There's a short and a long story. I'll give you the medium story here. So growing up, my mom was a nurse for Planned Parenthood and ran an infertility clinic. And my dad was an estate attorney, so he would talk to people about their end-of-life wishes and planning. And so when I took a course in college, it just really spoke to me, and I realized later that it combined the two things that were dinner table conversation growing up.
Absolutely, a lot of ethical debates and things surrounding.
Yeah, so what we were talking about while we were eating our dinner, apparently people didn't talk about around the dinner table when I got to college. That was a little bit of a surprise. But they did talk about it in the classroom, and so I just sort of fell into this new field that was just beginning at the time and found that it really spoke to me.
That's amazing. You've written a lot about bioethics. Talk a little bit about that, maybe.
So bioethics is a really broad thing, which is why I'm laughing. Bioethics, really, depending on how you look at it, sort of comes after World War II with the experiments done by the Nazis and the Japanese on prisoners, shall we say. And we really sort of started as, we're not treating people well. In those cases, they were torturing them. But then we looked at our own medicine and realized that doctors didn't necessarily talk with patients. They would talk at patients, and they would not tell them what was wrong with them, but they would say, hey, take 2 pills and call me in the morning. That joke is because it was true. And you weren't told what you were taking, and you weren't part of that process of treating yourself. So we evolved in a way around the time as the civil rights movement. That's when we really started getting programs, we started getting centers and media attention, which was all about how do we deal with these new questions of molecular biology. And in 1971 in Time magazine, there was actually a whole issue on the ethics of this new molecular biology, and how do we, as a society, sort of deal with these issues, and how do we think about it? And so bioethics was sort of born out of the latter half of the 20th century.
Very interesting, because I don't think a lot of people know exactly what that term means sometimes, so that's it's fascinating.
Well, the term itself is interesting because it originally referred to, was founded by biochemists and ecologists, and it was supposed to be about our relationship to the world, bioethics.
Sure,
right.
Yeah.
And then in that same issue of Time magazine, where there was all this stuff about the ethics of molecular biology, there was one little article about this guy at the University of Wisconsin who had this thing called bioethics. And he was looking at the environment. And the two published in the same place, everybody just applied bioethics to this work.
Interesting. So how do you approach an ethical challenge, or how would you recommend somebody approach an ethical challenge?
Yeah, so the way I teach this is, first you have to identify that you have an ethical issue, right? So it's not a legal issue, it's not a communication issue. In the hospital, 80% of what we deal with are communications. People just don't know how to talk to one another. So first we try and identify it, and we ask questions like, how would you feel if this got out? If people heard about this, would that be a worry? Or what if this was on the front page of the New York Times? And
That's a great way to approach it.
Yeah, if your action is, oh, that would be uncomfortable for our institution, you might have an ethical issue. Or is nothing happening? Are you making no decisions because nobody can figure out what to do? Or are there differences in values? One group wants to do one thing, one group wants another thing. That can be a sign that there might be an ethical issue involved. So we do that, and then we gather our facts. So we talk to everybody who's involved. We want to make sure that So to prepare for today, I talked to Thomas Callahan, and then I talked to my colleagues in genetics, and then I went through the literature. So we want to make sure that we're sort of up to date with what's going on. And then we will sort of look at what are the ethical issues here. What do we identify as sort of the moral challenges that are facing us? And then we'll look at some theories, some ethical theories, so the philosophy class that everybody loved. I hope.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, at least I did.
Me too. I
And
think
we'll-
everyone wanted to talk about philosophy, just to
Well,
know how to
that's
turn
it.
that into a career. Yes.
Yes, I'm happy I did. Although I was actually a biology major in college, so I kind of went the other direction. Yeah. So we apply the theories to sort of, okay, if we look through different lenses, what do we see here? And then often that leads us to some recommendations. So when I work with policy issues, it's, okay, here's some recommendations. If I work in the hospital, here's some recommendations. We never tell anybody what to do. Like, we don't have any authority. We're not a priest. We're not a lawyer. We're not a judge. We're not legislators. So we can't tell anybody what they have to do. But we can make some recommendations over what we think are better approaches and worse approaches. We're not really about telling people what is right and wrong. We're just sort of identifying what's out there and suggesting, better and worse, rather than do this and don't do this.
Which is probably smart, because I don't know if that ever works. Anyway, so.
Not in my family.
Right, no, mine either. Tell us a little bit about the panel. So genetic genealogy is what you'll be talking about today with a panel. How are you going to approach it? What are your thoughts on how the technology is being used?
So what's interesting about this panel, I think, is that it's people from various and strong viewpoints.
Absolutely.
Right. So we have people who view this sort of investigative genealogy as destruction of privacy and the end of civilization as we know it. And we have other people who are, we're going to solve every crime that we've ever had on the planet. And in the middle is usually where bioethics ends up sitting and looking at what comes from both ways. So I am sort of last in the rotation, and I will be listening very carefully to what everybody says. I do have some remarks I've prepared and some notes I've taken, but I will be changing those as I hear the arguments people are making. So a lot of what I'm going to be doing is identifying where there are logical consistencies, logical problems, and then how does it relate to what the literature has been saying. And some of ethics is just sort of your gut instinct. I've been doing this for 20 years, and there's a sense that you've gained an ethical voice in your head, is a way to think about it, that sort of, throws up little flags and says, wait a second, there's something there that nobody's realizing. And so I'm hoping to find something new that hasn't been discussed before, sort of a new way of thinking about the conversation.
Well, and there are myriad issues. I mean, if you look at it from commercial databases and privacy and how that relates to health data, to using it to solve a cold case, and who's the custodian of what piece of information, and
right, and who owns it. I mean, I'm coming more and more to my thinking that, my DNA is not really mine. It's mine and my 300 closest relatives.
that's a great point. Yeah.
So do I really have the right to give my DNA to a commercial database without having them all sign off on it? I have refused to do it. My spouse has, but we have no genetic relationship.
Okay.
And he has discovered relatives around the world that he didn't know about, which is really interesting and really intriguing to do. But I just feel like the loss of privacy, like, we haven't dealt with the legal and the ethical issues right now, and just throwing my personal DNA out there, I'm afraid that there aren't enough protections in place to know how this will be used and what will be used. And, we see this with the investigative genealogy. If you look at the user agreements for all the commercial and the public databases over the summer as a result of the Golden State Killer, they've all been updated to say, hey, we might give your stuff to law enforcement. And we'll tell you if we can, but we might not be able to. And so now there's a sense of, you have given a piece of yourself away and you don't control it. And that would be fine. If you could consent to that, you can make a choice. Not every choice is a great one, but you can make that choice. But the problem that I see is you're also then making a choice for 300 relatives.
That's very interesting, because familiar search and the way things connect together, or all of the genetic genealogy success stories, are part of a tree, really.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
And we hear about the handful of success stories, but we haven't heard about the hundreds of thousands of people whose records were invaded, were gone through, without them knowing about it, in order to get those few successes. And, if you talk to the investigators, they say, well, we clear more people with this than we catch. And so it's a way of getting people, out of the spotlight. But there's something, we do have this sense of privacy in this country. The Fourth Amendment holds on it. You can't just look at my cell phone. If I'm at, the TSA can't even just look in my cell phone, right?
True, very true.
So why should they be able to look at a DNA database? Another issue that I see here, which is coming about with what we're calling digital medicine, where we're using now technology that's not controlled by the doctors in the hospitals. And so we're used to in medicine the idea of an informed consent, where you give permission to use your materials and your illnesses and your secrets to help you get better. And a lot of people, especially in these public databases, are doing the same thing, right? They're going to these rooms, they're sharing their information to try and find family, but try and find answers to diseases and conditions they might have or that run in their family. And we share that information because we have an expectation that people will keep it confidential, that people are going to keep our secrets to help us. But now those same secrets are being used because these databases own them. And we have not been part of this. So we signed this little informed consent document, but now we're governed by the user agreement. And I was looking at some of the user agreements for these databases. They're 50 pages. I mean, famously, iTunes is 56 pages. Have you ever read the whole thing?
No, certainly not. Facebook, great example of everything that's happened there recently.
Right.
I mean, no, I haven't read them, but
Nobody
I
has read
participate.
these.
And I did 23andMe, and I'm rethinking.
Well, so you have the right to ask them to remove your stuff from the database.
Okay.
However, anybody they've shared it with, anybody who has shared your information, it doesn't get removed. Which is the same thing that happens on Facebook. You could delete your account, but if anybody's liked it or shared it, it's there forever. So, a lot of what I think ethics is coming to in this place is sort of, how do we, now that this exists and people are doing this, how do we put, the barn doors are open, the horses are out, how do we put up fences so that we can make sure that this information is used the way we want it to, instead of this sort of Wild West now where there are very few states that have rules about this.
That's a great point.
And, there's very few protections, if any. And, a lot of this is happening. Well, it's not illegal, so we can do this. But it's also not explicitly legal. So I think it would be better to have some system to do that. And for a lot of this, we're sort of in the new age of this. It would be better to have these conversations to prevent the problems that could become widespread when this is readily available.
Yes, let's be proactive, not reactive.
Right. I mean, if you've ever seen the movie Gattaca, there's this brilliant scene where this woman goes to a kiosk and they swab her mouth. And she says she just got a really big wet kiss from a potential date. Can they examine his DNA? And so they take it off of her lips, and then everybody is scored. They have a ranking based on how their DNA is. And what I'm seeing, and I think what we're seeing a little bit in this investigative genealogy, is that DNA is being used kind of like a credit score. And your worth as a human being, your innocence, your guilt, is often being determined by these techniques that we have some evidence works, but we also know that there's a lot we don't know. There's a lot we don't know about cross-contamination, secondary, I don't remember the other term, but when you transfer DNA from one person to another, and it can stay there for years in the same place, and the credentialing system isn't up and running yet, and the training is very inconsistent, and some lot of problems. And in my mind, if there's one innocent person who's locked up, then the system's really, really broken. And it's we're sort of set up as a country and a system that you're innocent before you're guilty. And now that we're looking through people's records without them knowing, there's sort of this sense that I have that somebody is guilt by association. It reminds me of the Red Scares of the 50s. Are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? And it seems like because these databases are focused on different people of socioeconomic levels and minority status and geographic regions, there seems to be that you come under greater suspicion simply because of who you know or where you live. And I think that's a problem.
This is going to be a very interesting panel.
I hope so.
I think so. These are amazing points. I think, a lot of people just don't think through. Naturally, it's very natural. This seems there's a lot of positive things that can come out of this data, but how do we manage it? Yeah.
Right, and I think that's what it comes down to. I'm not coming here saying, no, it's immoral, we can't ever do this. Here's a stone from on high, it says, thou shalt not. But I'm also saying that we should think about this intelligently, and the technology has probably gotten ahead of our thinking. You know, groups like this and organizations like this are important for having these conversations, and that's why I'm so excited to be here, that people are actually thinking about these issues. But I think it needs to go further, and we need to have state and national task forces that are kind of drawing up these rules. I know there's a little of that going on, but it really needs to apply when we've got databases, national databases and state databases. Having a consistent and coherent set of rules would really make everybody's lives easier.
Absolutely. Well, we're so happy you're here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Got 'em standing still. Glamorous, dangerous, I've been to no will. One way